Hey, thanks for joining us this morning for this really information-packed webinar that we have today under our WorkWise webinar umbrella. We have a charter school professional council here at CASBO offering you the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on charter school renewals. I'm Tasha Davenport, CASBO CEO. Welcome again, we're happy to have you. And just a couple of logistics before we get started. First, you'll see posted in the Q&A box the presentation for today. That session, this session, will be recorded, and that link will be posted on our brand new website, casbo.org, same location, new website, under sources and services. And so that typically takes about 24 to 48 hours to post, but you can find that same information with this recording there in pretty short order. What we'll be doing today is taking the questions in the Q&A box. We have a disabled chat just because it sends us a few different directions, and this way we can actually see the questions that you have coming in. We will be answering those at the end. And so I ask as participants, if you have a question directed at one of our panelists, please identify their name. This question is for Kristin, and that way we can direct it accordingly. Otherwise, we'll ask the panel, and whoever is the expert on that topic and comfortable sharing the answer, that's the way that that will go. So without further delay, I'm going to turn it over to our Charter Schools Professional Council Chair, Violet Gutierrez.
Hi, good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today. We're very excited with the information we're about to present on the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on charter school renewals. And the best part about today's session, I believe, is that we have some amazing folks here and are able to, and will be able to provide insight and information. So let me go ahead and introduce you to those. That is Dr. Jeffrey Hunt, the Director of Charter Schools for the Office of Fresno County Superintendent of Schools. Kristin, Armatis, our Senior Director of Charter Schools over in San Diego County Office of Education. Mr. Matthew Wahlman, the Chief Business Officer for Shasta Charter Academy. And then my name is Violet Gutierrez. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and open up the next set of slides with Matt Wahlman, and hear what he has to say.
Great. Thank you so much, Violet and Tasha. It's been a pleasure working with both of you. Good conversations, and really appreciate you both and the way you support CASBO and the rest of us. So let's jump in. Why are we here? We're here because despite the pandemic, the state's various responses to it, the process of charter renewals is still moving forward. And so despite those challenges, there's still work to be done. We'll discuss a number of the issues that COVID has brought. We'll also hopefully share some insights, some flexibility, some options for doing those renewals well. I did want to also mention as we move forward that there are some other resources out there that are available for this, helping you in this renewal process. We've got the CSDC, Charter Schools Development Center, Lozano Smith, CCSA, California Charter Schools Association, and the CDE have all put out different guides to help you in this process, give insight, because it is a complex process. So with that, let's dive into the next slide. All right, a little background about this. Since AB 1505 was passed in 2019, charter schools have been placed into 3 renewal tiers: high, low, and middle. Every year, the CDE publishes a list of all non-DAS or Dashboard Alternative School Status charter schools showing their renewal tier. The California dashboard results are used to determine the high and low renewal tiers. As noted on the slide, the prior 2 years of data before renewal would typically be used. However, if one of those years is 2019, the prior 2 out of 3 years is used. All right, next slide. Thank you. If a school does not qualify initially for either the high or the low track, they're placed into the middle tier. As can be seen, the largest majority of charter schools fall into that middle track, 76%, and a full 94% of charter schools placed in that middle or high performing tier. Obviously, the dashboard, the California School Dashboard results have a prominent role in determining those tiers. However, to be clear, they do not by themselves determine renewal. There's more to it than that. So without getting into all those details, there are other factors of influence like the use of student growth data that can be used to show that renewal is in the best interest of students. But we'll be getting into using verified data a little bit later. Next slide. The budget trailer bill in 2020 made an adjustment to allow more data to be looked at, although slightly older data. So this is an important nuance that was made. Instead of just the 2 most recent years of dashboard data, they were then able to look at another year beyond that. So let's go to the next slide and look at that more closely. So the former would have moved all schools into that middle track, as the lack of data in the 2020 dashboard would have necessarily put them in there. Whereas the latter means that all authorizers could look increasingly at more data, but it is slightly older data. So without this adjustment, all charter schools would have been lumped together, whereas using older data, they could still get important information, though it is older information. So with this, the process was not set up with a pandemic in mind. Obviously, that is stretching all of these processes further than they were intended to go. So our goal is to help lay out some of those issues and then give some advice on that. Obviously, with the trailer bill still being written and modified, some of this could change, and we are all in the middle of that. So bear with us. Let's jump into the next slide and look at this chart, please. All right, so this chart kind of highlights the issues that we've just been talking about, the track placement, and then we'll be getting into verified data. But in blue, you'll see those are the years that no data was actually collected or was not required to be collected, I'd say. So for the year 2019-20, that spring 2020, the CASB was canceled, obviously due to the pandemic. In this current year, the data was not required. So if you've got a school that is looking for renewal for next year, then you're looking back to see their data and it's either missing or you have to go back much further and it's old data. So these are the issues, the limitations that we found. So let's dive in some more. With that, I want to hand it over to my colleague, Dr. Jeffrey Hunt.
Good morning and greetings from beautiful, warm Central California here in Fresno. And so we'll start by looking at track placement as it stands, and as well as track placement as it relates to the trailer bill and potential and proposed changes as it relates to the trailer bill. So let's just dive in. And so in 2020, as a result of the pandemic and the cancellation of SBAC testing, as Matt talked about, the new renewal standard from 1505, and it really is tied to the dashboard. So 2020 kind of threw us for a loop in ironically, in the first year of implementation of this new standard, you were without dashboard data. And so the wheels were spinning. And so in 2020, in the trailer bill, I believe it was SB 82. I may be wrong, but language, there was a clause put into 47607 that changed from the 2 most recent years ahead of the renewal petition to 2 out of the 3 most recent years, if one of those years included 2019. And next slide. And so this rewording meant that instead of the schools being placed in the middle track after the non-release of the dashboard in 2020, as all schools missing data. Well, no schools had data. Schools were placed in tracks based on increasingly old data. So basically, if you had a school up for renewal in 2021, this school year that we're going out of, you had to look back to 2018 and 2019, as those were the 2 years that determined the school's placement on those tracks. And here in Fresno, we had a school that was placed on in and had to do a renewal on a school that was placed in a low performance track based on 2018 data, and they didn't have 2020 data that would possibly have pulled them out of that situation. Next slide. So the for a school renewing in 21-22 coming up this school year, if things stay as they are written, the high, middle, and low track would be determined by data from the first 2 years of that charter's 5-year term. So you're going again back to 2018 and 2019 to look at data to renew a charter in potentially spring of 2022. So you're talking about, because we're looking at an absence of 2 years of SBAC data. Again, the really important thing being is that the new charter renewal standard is really tied to the SBAC. Next slide. So fast forward a year for a school renewing in 22-23, you're talking about track placement based on the first and fourth year of a term, because those middle 2 years, you have an absence of SBAC data. So additionally, so when you think about a low performing charter that is renewed for a 2-year term, they still may face challenges with data and performance tier placement at the end of the 2-year term. Perfect example, the school that our county board elected to renew for a 2-year term, when those 2 years is up, we still may be looking at only 1 year of reliable SBAC data as it relates to that charter's renewal a couple years down the road, because now we're 2 years without valid SBAC data, as schools were given an option if it was viable for them to go ahead and use SBAC for this year. When you think about middle performing charter schools and the criteria for renewal, you're looking at some of the same challenges because you're absent definitely 1 year and potentially 2 years of valuable data. So you may be in a position of piecing together data to provide a thorough analysis of your middle performing charters. And as the chart that Matt went over just a few moments ago showed, that's the majority of our charters. So as a district, as an authorizer, much thought is going to have to go into analyzing your middle performing charters. And if it's something you hadn't thought about or had conversations with your board about, these are things, irrespective of where the trailer bill goes and what's approved and what's not approved. These are conversations you may want to be having with your charter team and your board as it relates to, and even your charters, right? So they're not shooting at a moving target. Like, these are conversations that are really relevant for you to be having as an authorizer with your board and with your charter school leaders. Again, so they're not aiming for a moving target when they come up for renewal next spring, or this fall or spring.
Good morning, everyone.
We're going to go ahead and kind of jump into some verified data here, which, as we all know, AB 1505 changed the entire structure of charter school renewals. Everything from how we determine a charter school's renewal performance tier, that's something brand new. You know, the legislation for the longest time has been all based around API scores, which we all know that those went away long ago, it feels now. And so this new legislation with AB 1505 really changed the landscape for charter renewals. And so today we want to talk just a little bit about this verified data piece. So verified data came into play with AB 1505, and as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, I think most authorizers and charter schools have now seen even more of a reliance on verified data for their charter renewals, especially this last year, just coming, you know, being kind of right smack dab in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so verified data came about again with AB 1505. And AB 1505 stated that the State Board of Education would need to determine what verified data could be used for charter renewals. And so at the November 2020, so just this past November, at that State Board of Education meeting, the State Board adopted a list of verified data, academic progress indicators, as well as post-secondary indicators. And we've provided a link there so you can, you know, if you want to go read another board agenda, which we all love doing those, right? But if you want to go read another board agenda, you're more than welcome to jump out to the CDE website and take a look at that yourself. Now, these verified data pieces went into effect January 1st of 2021, so just 5 months ago here, almost 6 months ago. This is the list of verified data for both the academic progress indicators as well as the post-secondary indicators. And I don't want to spend a huge amount of time here, but I do want to point out that you will notice that the CASBO data down at the very bottom of the slide under academic indicators is in italics. And so you might be thinking, well, why is that one different than all of the rest? Especially when we think about the performance tiers are already identified based off of dashboard data, which pulls from CASBO data, right? And so I just want to point out that there was an additional piece that the State Board adopted with respect to CASBO. And so what the State Board said was, specifically for the CASBO data for English language arts and for literacy and math, specified CASBO reported data can only be used in a manner consistent with the data reported on the CASBO website and California School Dashboard. CASBO data and methodologies for analyzing CASBO data that are mutually agreed upon by the chartering authority and charter school may be used to supplement dashboard results. However, CASBO data may not be used to dispute the dashboard results. So I just want to point that out. That particular language is included in that State Board of Education agenda item. So you guys can, you know, pull that very specific piece there. But I just want to point that out, that there was kind of a caveat or an additional piece that was adopted specific to CASBO and verified data. So now we're going to talk about, when is verified data used? And so verified data is really used for low performing and middle performing charter schools. That's when we see in Education Code 47607.2 that verified data really comes into play. And so in both of the sections of 47607.2 that refer to both low and middle performing charter schools, it states that the chartering authority shall consider clear and convincing evidence as demonstrated by verified data showing either of the following. And so this is why we have two sets of verified data criteria. The first being the school achieved measurable increases in academic achievement as defined by at least 1 year's progress for each year in school. And the second is strong post-secondary outcomes as defined by college enrollment, persistence, and completion rates equal to similar peers. So that's really when this verified data comes into play. And as Matt showed on one of his earlier slides, 76% of charter schools are in the middle performing tier, and about either 6 or 18%, I forgive me here, were in that low performing tier. So really we're talking about a pretty large amount, almost all charters, or a good majority of charter schools will be needing to use verified data, and their authorizers needing to analyze that verified data when it comes to their renewal. Both the low performing and the middle performing ed codes were cited on the bottom of that slide if you want to go look at their specific pieces. So one of the things that COVID-19, some of the challenges that we've seen around verified data. I mean, COVID-19 in general has just, I think, shaken all of us, all of our communities. It has kind of flipped us all on our heads. And so really this has changed even the delivery method for the way in which a lot of our students are receiving services. So even students that might have been in a hybrid program where it's a non-classroom based charter school, but some of those kids were still attending school, you know, 2, 3, 4 times a week, where this was still a really big change for them to go to 100% distance learning, as well as the changes that we see for, you know, seat-based programs. So COVID-19 was just a large challenge in general. We look at implementation of new assessments. So obviously verified data went into effect January 1st of this year. So just those 5-6 months ago. Now, I know in our experience, most of our charter schools that we did renewals for this year already had kind of one of those pieces, one of those verified data pieces in place at their schools, but some of them might not have had it in place for very long. So in some cases, some of those verified data assessments might have only been in place for 1 or 2 years. And so again, that's a challenge there, right? But the implementation of a new assessment in itself is a really big hurdle for any school to implement. And so we know that there are challenges around this in determining, you know, which type of verified data assessment might be the right fit for a particular school, for their particular student population, for their particular program design, and really figuring out how do we implement that, number one, just in general, and number two, now how do we implement that in the middle of a pandemic, which kind of gets us to that next bullet point of not ideal testing conditions. So we know that right now, you know, there's been a lot of flexibility around assessments and testing and pausing on kind of our standardized tests. But we also know that schools, and many of them and districts, are moving forward now, right, with still doing like their interim assessments to really find out where their kids are, to take an assessment of whether or not there is learning loss or how great that learning loss might be. And so what we know is that some of these kids might be testing at home. Some kids might be testing in a classroom or on a campus, and some kids might be testing in both of those environments at various points throughout the year. So in some particular cases, you know, it's really hard to judge whether that testing environment could have had an impact on a potential student's score, right? If they're testing at home, maybe they have younger siblings at home as well. There's been lots of connectivity issues as well, you know, around COVID and students at home. So that's been one of the larger challenges there, and trying to identify, you know, the data that comes out of these verified data assessments, and figuring out, you know, what might have attributed to some of these scores. And I will point out that in some cases, there might have been an increase or a spike in scores, and the conversation has been around, well, you know, what did that testing environment at home look like also, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be that the scores went down dramatically, but we have had conversations, you know, around where we've seen dramatic increases in test scores, where you know, the question becomes is, you know, was there maybe some assistance at home, or, you know, those kinds of conversations. And so the next item here that has been another large challenge is really around the lack of data. So as I mentioned before, some schools only had some of these assessments in place for 1 or 2 years before this happened. And so we're looking at almost the same lack of data that we're seeing with the dashboard in some cases. And I will tell you that in our office, we had a few charters that only had 3-year initial terms.
when we originally granted their petition. And so, you know, there might be other authorizers out there where they did not do an initial term of a full 5 years. It might have been less than that. And so in those particular cases, some of our schools didn't even have dashboard data like at all, or they only had 1 year of dashboard data, which isn't enough to get them an actual color on the dashboard, right? Because you need 2 years. So the lack of data is definitely challenging, and it's definitely challenging when you're trying to look at maybe only 1 or 2 years of CASB data, and then maybe only 1 or 2 years of verified data to truly assess, was there that growth that EdCode defines of that 1 year for each year the student is enrolled. So these are just things to kind of keep in mind as you're looking at these verified data pieces. And then lastly, one of the other challenges that we've seen is different students. So again, COVID-19 just kind of flipped things on their heads. And what we saw was increases and decreases in enrollment across charter schools. And in some particular cases, they might have seen decreases kind of throughout like the first 6 months of this school year, even, because people are still trying to figure out like, what does life look like for our family? And you know, now my homeschool is reopening, you know, my district school is reopening. So now we want to go back to that. Or, you know, we've really enjoyed being the at home doing home study or doing this independent study program, and we want to stick with that for this year. So we've seen really those enrollment increases and decreases and some really great fluctuations, which keep in mind that when it comes to verified data, you know, schools are generally testing, you know, anywhere from 3 to 4 times a year. And those assessment scores may have completely different groups of kids in them from one assessment period to the next. And so that's just something to keep in mind. We also noticed and saw this in some cases that the 2019 data as compared to the 2020 data, we saw a pretty large drop in students. And it wasn't that the charter school lost enrollment as much as it was that last spring assessment in March of 2020, when we first kind of got into this pandemic, or April. There was just a much lower participation rate. And a lot of that was around, you know, again, connectivity issues. Do we have laptops? You know, I think there's probably still some folks with laptops or Chromebooks on back order, right? This was all just a completely new hurdle for all of us. So keep that in mind. Look at your, you know, the amount of students that tested at each of these periods as you're looking at scores, because again, that can kind of give you a clue as to whether or not it's been the same consistent body that's moved through the school and the testing environment, or whether this has really been, you know, kind of, we're not even looking at the same kids in our program right now that we were 9 or 12 months ago. So looking forward a little bit on the verified data piece, there is a component to 47607.2, which was in legislation with AB 1505, and it specifically states that this section will remain in effect only until January 1st of 2026, and as of that date, it is repealed. And I will tell you that I read this section and I immediately had to go send a few emails out to say, okay, what section gets repealed? Like all of the renewal section? Is it just a part of the renewal section? What are we talking about here? Because it's a little bit vague. But in essence, they have provided the repealed version of this code. And what it does is it removes all of the verified data pieces that's in EdCode in 47607.2 as when charter school renewals are concerned. And so we've provided the links to the 2 different pieces. Again, 2026 still feels like it is miles and miles away from us right now. And so we don't know, you know, potentially there could be legislation, you know, we don't know what this might look like if there's any legislative changes, but as it stands right now, that verified data portion of the code as it reads right now essentially comes out of that effective January 1st, 2026. So again, verified data is here for a short time, but then is also so critical when it comes to renewals of the majority of our charter schools. So just keep that in mind as you guys are kind of thinking about long-term planning, both for charters and for, authorizers. That's kind of a pretty big deal when it comes to kind of that long-term, short-term planning. And so again, looking ahead, right? We know that the recent trailer bill language for 2021 has just been released, and there was revised language that just came out on Monday night also. So it has been changing and evolving. But we want to spend just a little bit of time with you guys this morning talking about some of the language in the trailer bill that is specific to charter school renewals. And so if you want to go to the next slide, I think. So the May revise obviously had language and the trailer bill language. And so there is a new section of code that has been proposed. And basically it says, notwithstanding the renewal process and criteria established in sections 47605.9, 47607, and 47607.2, all charter schools with a term beginning on or before July 1st, 2020, and whose term expires between June 30th, 2022 and June 30th, 2025, shall have their term extended by 2 years. And so that is the most updated. This language did change slightly on Monday night when they released revised language. So this is the newest language, unless there was something that went out last night that I haven't read yet this morning. But this is essentially saying that any charter schools that have a charter term on or before July 1st of 2020, and that charter term is going to expire next June, so June 30th, 2022, through June 30th, 2025, those charters shall have their term extended by 2 years. And really, this is around the lack of data, is what it comes down to. And so just keep that in mind. Again, this is the proposed language. It has not been enacted as of this point. It is proposed right now. But if this is enacted, it will go into effect when they sign the state budget, essentially, in July. And so generally that's July 1st or very shortly after that we generally see that getting signed in. The other component to charter renewals that we saw in the May revised was a proposed amendment to current legislation or to current law. And that is, if 2 consecutive years immediately preceding the renewal are 2019-20 or 2020-21, a chartering authority shall consider dashboard data for 2 of the most recent years for which the state data is available preceding the renewal decision in determining the performance tiers of a school. And so earlier we heard from Dr. or from Jeff and from Matt about the 2 consecutive years with the performance tier and the track placement for charter schools. And what it has currently read and how it currently reads is 2 out of the 3 years if one of those years is 2019. And essentially this is proposing to change that so that if the renewal, if one of the 2 most immediate years preceding the renewal is 2019-20 or 2021, then essentially they're going to use the 2 most current years of dashboard data. And so again, this is really trying to do the fix for the lack of dashboard data available to schools and available for these performance tiers. And so again, this could be critical for you in determining what track placement or looking at what track placement some of your schools might fall into, because you might be looking further back, or you might have a 2018 year as compared to like a 2022 year potentially too, right? So things could get a little bit challenging. when we're looking at some of these data pieces. But just keep that in mind as you're kind of, you know, moving forward and working through these processes, that this dashboard data, the verified data, this is all going to be kind of critical mass, even more so as we kind of come out of this pandemic. And extending charter terms for an additional 2 years. Again, if this goes into effect, I'm not sure what that looks like at this point, aside from I would imagine that there are going to be a lot of MOU revisions between authorizers and charter schools in order to extend that charter term. But I as more information is available and as we have additional resources available, I know that all of us will be sharing that with our charter school PCs, and pushing that information out to everybody.
So at this juncture, we're very excited that we were able to hear from our panel experts. As you know, they're on the field doing this work on the daily, and those of us who have been in that space recognize how critically valuable the information is and ever changing. But we do want to take an opportunity to allow for questions and for clarification's sake, and just to ensure that you're able to tap into the wealth of resource and expertise that these folks provide. We're very excited to have you because we recognize that in this particular critical, highly technical work, we know that we need all the support we can get. So jointly, we're here to provide that.
Good morning. So the first question we have is for Kristin. If the ad is approved, does that mean their term is extended by 2 years and their renewal is then postponed for 2 years? For example, a school that was renewed for 5 years and is set to expire June 30, 2023 would then expire June 30, 2025 without anything additional needed to be done.
Yes, that's our understanding of the legislation at this point, that it would essentially extend those charter terms and push out those renewals for 2 additional years. Now, again, there has been, you know, language changes to this, obviously, just in the last few days. And so, you know, this might still morph a little bit or have some other adjustments, but our understanding as of right now is yes, it would push the term out by 2 years as well as that renewal.
Our reply was great, thank you. That would be awesome and fair. If there are any other questions, please add them to your the Q&A chat. At this moment, I don't see any more.
Kristin, could we speak to the clarification we got as it relates to those 2 years on renewals that were done this year or in process this year? Do you mind speaking to that, or if you want me to?
Yeah. So the legislation, the change that was made actually just in the last kind of 48 hours here, prior to this, it just said a charter term whose term expires on or before June 30th of 2025. And so for some of us, especially charters that might have had a limited initial term, it would put them into qualifying under both of these requirements. Their charter term started on or before July 1st, and their charter term expired on or before June 30th of 2025. And so for our office in particular, we did 7 renewals already this year for 7 of our schools. And so the question came up of, does this apply to any charter schools who have already gone through the renewal process now and might have already been granted a new charter term? And we did get some clarification back on that it would not apply to any renewals or action that was taken in the current school year, the 2020-21 school year. And I think that was part of the reason that, you know, that this, you know, language kind of was updated a little bit in the last 48 hours to make sure that it wouldn't impact any action that was already taken this particular fiscal year.
Violet and Tasha, I don't see any other questions that have come in so far.
All right. Thank you. What a wealth of information this team provided. I was madly taking notes over here. It's, you know, that balance of the short-term and long-term planning really came through. I really appreciate the translation services for that trailer bill language and helping us really understand what that means in terms of next steps for our audience. So thank you for that. And again, just the wealth of information. I did make a note that Dell Computer Company was like gum on my shoe, man. They were like, update that system. I'm like, stop it. But anyway, to our panel, thank you so much for your time and energy and just bringing a wealth of information through CASBO's professional counsel. We appreciate it. We will be recording this, putting it online on our website, casbo.org, tomorrow. And any questions that you might have, this group's contact information is also provided in the presentation. So feel free to reach out directly and get more expert knowledge. With that, again, much appreciated for the audience, for the panelists. Have a great day, and thank you for your service.
Thank you, everyone.